Hi, welcome everyone. This is Yoan, and in this episode, we're gonna make this super cute pillow and a table runner. And we're gonna use one set of charm pack or the pre-cut 5-inch squares for these two projects. The blocks that we're gonna be working on is the square in a square block. If you remember last Christmas, I shared the square in a square quilt project using layer cakes. Now in this project, we're going to use the same principle. However, we will use the charm pack instead of layer cake. For the pillow, you will need an 18-inch square pillow form, and the cover itself is removable. There is a zipper closure at the back, so you can unzip it and remove the cover in case you will need to wash it. The runner itself is measuring 15 inches wide by 30 inches long. However, for me, I'm going to use this as a wall hanging instead of table runner, but it can work both ways. So I've got the pattern available on PDF format that you may download. The link is in the description box down below. A quick shout out to Email who requested a table runner and a cushion cover tutorial. So Email, I hope you like this video. Alright, enough of me talking. Let's jump straight into the tutorial. Prepare 40 pieces of charm squares for both the pillow and the table runner. Now take two contrasting color charm pack and you wanna stack them on top of each other, just like so, making sure that all the edges are aligned. Now take your ruler and measure out 2 inches from the edge and then cut. And then you wanna measure another 2 inches from the previous cutting line and then cut. So you should end up with 3 strips of fabric. This one is 2 inches wide and the next one is also 2 inches wide, and the third piece should be 1 inch wide. Set the first and the third strip aside. So you want to keep the center 2 inches wide strip, and then you want to rotate this just like so. Now take your ruler and repeat the cutting just like before. So measure 2 inches and then cut, and then measure another 2 inches from the previous cutting line and then cut. So you should end up with 5 pieces of fabric, and we're gonna name each piece alphabetically as shown on the screen right now. And you should be able to see the measurements as well. Separate fabric 1 from fabric 2. However, you want to swap the center 2-inch square or the fabric D. And you should end up with something like this. Now go ahead and sew them together with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. So I'm going to start by sewing fabric C and fabric D together. And then press the seams towards any direction, it doesn't really matter. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew fabric E. Alright, now we're gonna sew these side strips or fabric A and B. Obviously they are a slight longer, so I like to start not exactly from the edge, but rather a little down or somewhat centered. Now we're gonna trim off the excess fabric and square up the block. If everything lays flat, this block should measure 4 inch by 4 inch. Now go ahead and sew the other set pretty much the same way. And voila, here I've got 2 blocks ready to go. Now let's move on and work on the rest of the charm pack. and you will need to make in total of 40 blocks. To make the pillow, you will need 25 blocks, and you want to lay them out in 5 rows and 5 columns. And when you lay out your blocks, you want to lay them out in different directions to make the whole design looks more interesting. And it will be easier later to sew the blocks together since you don't really have to line up the seams. Once you're happy with the layout of your patchwork, go ahead and sew them together one row at a time. Press the seams towards one side. Press the seams of each row towards opposite directions. So, for example, if you press the seams of the first row towards the left, you want to press the seams of the second row towards the right, and vice versa. Now let's go ahead and sew all the rows together, starting from the first row with the second row. Sew them with 1/4 inch of seam allowance, and you should be able to nest the seams since we press the seams towards opposite direction. As you can see here, I match the seams as I go, but if you want to, you can pin them in place before sewing if that will be easier for you. Alright, so here we've got the patchwork for the pillow ready to go. The next step will be to quilt this, so go ahead and layer it with the quilt batting and the backing fabric, and then you can go ahead and quilt as desired. I free motion quilt this with this fuzzy spiral design, so technically it's the same as when you do spiral. However, you want to form this design with wiggly lines, which really gives more interesting effect. And I actually found this design to be easier and more forgiving than the actual spiral design. Obviously, you can do simpler design like stipple or loops, or you can quilt this with your walking foot with simple straight lines or wavy lines, or you can also hand quilt this. Alright, here I've already quilted my patchwork. Now I'm gonna go ahead and trim off all the excess batting and backing fabric. Now, if everything lays flat, your patchwork or the front cover piece should now measure 18 inch by 18 inch. Now let's work on the back side of the pillows. So go ahead and prepare the fabric. So you've got 2 pieces of fabric, one for the upper and one for the lower. As you can see here, I use a longer zipper, but I'm gonna trim this off anyway later. Finish the raw edges of the lower part of the back 1 fabric and the upper top of the back 2 fabric. You can do this either with zigzag stitch or serger if you have one. So I actually forgot this step and realized it after I installed the zipper. So what I did was I applied a little bit of fray check along the edges to stop the fraying. Lay the back 1 piece on the right side of the zipper, right side down. Of course, you want to align the edges of the fabric with the edges of the zipper. Go ahead and secure them in place with some sewing clips and then sew with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Now you want to open this up, press the seams, and then top stitch. Now lay the back two piece right side up and then lay the zipper right side down, just like that. Obviously, you will need to align the edges. Secure them in place with some sewing clips and then sew with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Again, you want to press the seams and top stitch. Alright, here I've already sewn my zipper. Now I'm gonna go ahead and trim off the excess zipper. And I also hand stitch both ends of the zipper to secure them. Now that we've got both of the front and back pillow pieces ready to go, we're gonna go ahead and assemble this. There are two methods that you can do. First is the binding method. Lay the front piece wrong side up and then lay the back piece wrong side down. And then go ahead and bind this all around. If you make your own binding, you will need 3 binding strips. So you can bind this the same way you would bind a quilt. This method will result in a very clean look, both the outside and the inside of your pillow. The second method is a faster and more efficient approach, and this is the one that I'm going to do for this project. So you want to lay the front piece right side up and then lay the back piece right side down. Make sure that you unzip the zipper at least halfway. Secure this in place with some sewing clips and then go ahead and sew all around with 3/8 of an inch of seam allowance. Once you've done that, you can clip all the corners. Just be careful not to cut through the stitches. Now you can finish the raw edges with zigzag stitch, or you can use serger if you've got one. Now turn your fabric inside out through the zipper opening. Poke the corners with a point turner or the tip of your hair marker, chopstick, or knitting needle. As mentioned earlier, you will need an 18-inch square pillow form. So go ahead and insert the pillow form. Now the casing is now obviously a bit smaller due to the seam allowances. And that is perfectly fine. It will make the pillow fit snugly inside the cover. And voila, the pillow is done. To make the table runner, we're gonna use the remaining blocks plus some background strips. Lay them out just like shown here or as directed on the pattern. And then you want to start sewing each row of the blocks together. Press the seams towards one side. Alright, now we're gonna go ahead and sew the strips number 1. So I'm going to start from the very first strip. And of course, we're gonna sew with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. And then press the seams towards the background strip. Next, we're gonna work on strips number 2 or the longer strip. Sew them with 1/4 inch of seam allowance, and if you want to, you can pin them in place before you sew. So do what makes sense for you. Alright, I am done piecing the patchwork. Now I'm gonna go ahead and layer this with the batting and the backing fabric and start the quilting process. For this piece, I do free motion quilting with random geometric design. I started off from here, so I stitched a random shape and then I went ahead and built around it. So this design is quite simple actually. All you need to do is connecting the lines. Don't think too much about the shape. The more random the shape is, the better. And this design gives that mosaic kind of look, which is just great since I'm going to use this as a wall hanging, so the texture from the quilting really going to stand out. Again guys, feel free to quilt this in any design that you desired, so you do you. Around the border area, I do the pebbling or simply stitching a bunch of circles in various sizes to fill in the space. Once you've done quilting, go ahead and trim off the excess batting and backing. And then next you can go ahead and finish the table runner by binding it with your favorite binding method. If you make your own binding strips, you will need 3 strips. And for this project, I actually did a little bit of shortcut by using some of my leftover jelly roll strips. One of the strip is different color, which I did on purpose just to make it a bit more interesting. And since this is going to be a wall hanging, I'm also attaching the hanging sleeve. So I'm gonna go ahead and sew my binding pretty much the same way as I would binding a quilt. Again guys, feel free to do whichever binding method that you prefer. And that's about it for you today guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time with another fun sewing and quilting projects. Goodbye!